"Come get me," 4 words. That was all she said. Her voice barely above a breath, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. Around her, through the thin walls of that storage room, she could hear laughter, clinking glasses, DJ playing something cheerful. Her sister was dancing. The flowers were perfect. Everything was perfect, except Emma. Emma Whitmore had just made the most dangerous phone call of her life, not to the police, not to her mother, not to her lawyer. She called a Hell's Angels boss, and he was already reaching for his keys. This story moves you. Please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along with me all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. She had rehearsed the smile for 3 weeks. Not for the wedding, not for the photographs, not even for her family, who expected her to glow with pride the way a devoted older sister was supposed to glow. No, Emma Whitmore had rehearsed the smile because her husband, Daniel Whitmore, had told her exactly what would happen if she didn't wear it right. "You embarrass me in front of my colleagues," he had said the previous Thursday, standing too close to her in the kitchen, voice quiet and measured in the way that always scared her more than shouting. "You will regret every single second of it. Do you understand me, Emma?" She had nodded. She had said yes. She had told him she understood. She did understand. That was the unbearable part. She understood Daniel Whitmore completely. She understood that the man standing in that kitchen, straightening his cufflinks, was the same man who had charmed her family 5 years ago at a charity gala in Newport Beach, California. He had been 34 then, broad-shouldered and confident, with a laugh that made every person in the room feel like they were in on a private joke. Emma's mother had pulled her aside within the first hour and whispered, "He's wonderful, sweetheart. He's absolutely wonderful." And Emma, 24 years old, and still believing that the world rewarded goodness with goodness in return, had agreed. She had agreed for a very long time. It was remarkable when she looked back how gradually everything had shifted. How it had happened in increments so small she could barely name them, even now. The first time he criticized the way she laughed too loud, he said, "Too attention-seeking." The first time he questioned where she had been and who she had spoken with. The first time he told her that her friends were bad influences and that the people in his circle were more appropriate for a woman in her position. She had told herself each of those moments was an isolated thing, a rough night, stress from work, nothing she needed to take seriously. The time she understood what was happening, she had already lost most of the people she might have run to. That was his genius. That was the thing about Daniel Whitmore that nobody on the outside ever saw. He was deliberate, never moved fast enough for anyone to notice. He was a contractor who knew exactly which load-bearing walls to remove and in what order so that the house fell slowly, quietly, and appeared to collapse on its own. Emma had spent 4 years and 11 months watching herself disappear, and she had become very, very good at making it look like she was fine. She stood in front of the mirror in her family's estate that morning, the Whitmore family property in Montecito, where her parents had agreed to host her younger sister Claire's wedding, and she applied her makeup with the precision of a woman who had learned that appearances were armor, foundation, concealer, blush in exactly the right places to suggest warmth she no longer felt. She studied her own reflection and thought, "Not for the first time, you are very good at this. You should be proud of how good you are at this." She was not proud. Outside the window, the wedding preparations were in full swing. She could hear her mother directing the florist. She could hear Claire laughing about something, that bright, easy laugh that had always made Emma feel simultaneously grateful and heartbroken grateful that Claire had never learned to be careful with her laugh, heartbroken that she herself had. Daniel appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. "You're not ready," he said. "I have 15 minutes. She kept her voice even, steady. She had learned to make her voice completely flat when she spoke to him, to remove every possible note that he could interpret as defiance or challenge. "I'll be ready. The ceremony starts in 45. My father's already downstairs." He brought the Harrington people with him. Emma set down her mascara brush carefully and turned to look at him. "I know, Daniel. I've known for 3 weeks. Then act like it. He stepped into the room, and even though there were 6 feet of space between them, her body registered his movement the way a small animal registers a shadow passing overhead. Not a flinch, nothing so obvious as that, but a sharpening of attention, stillness. My father is going to ask about the Meridian deal. When he does, you smile, and you say you're very proud of Daniel's work, and you leave the conversation to the adults. Clear? The word adults sat in the air between them for a moment. Clear, Emma said. Good, he smoothed his jacket lapel. You look fine, by the way. Not as polished as you could be, but fine. He left the room. Emma turned back to the mirror and looked at the woman looking back at her. She was 29 years old. She had a master's degree in environmental law from Stanford. She spoke 3 languages. She had been once the kind of woman who argued passionately and laughed too loudly and stayed at the table after everyone else had left to talk with the people she found most interesting. She looked at her reflection for a long moment. Then she picked up her mascara brush and finished what she was doing. The wedding ceremony was, by every objective measure, beautiful. Claire Whitmore, now Claire Hendricks, married a man named James, who had apparently been built in a laboratory specifically to be everything a person could want in a partner. He was kind. He was funny. He cried when he read his vows, and not just a little real tears, the kind that made every woman in attendance reach for a handkerchief and every man in attendance suddenly find his own eyes suspiciously wet. He had looked at Claire like she was the explanation for something he had spent his whole life trying to understand. Emma had watched from her position in the front row and felt something twist so sharply inside her chest that she had to press her thumbnail into her palm to keep her face controlled. She was happy for Claire. She needed to be clear about that, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. She was genuinely, completely happy for her sister. Claire deserved every beautiful thing in that moment. But happiness for someone else, Emma had discovered, could exist at the same time as a grief so enormous and so private that it became its own kind of weight. Grief of recognizing watching 2 people who actually loved each other, how far from that place you had traveled. How long ago you had stopped being able to imagine it for yourself. Daniel stood beside her throughout the ceremony with his hand on the small of her back. Gesture looked affectionate. She knew it was territorial. She could feel the slight increase of pressure whenever she shifted her weight, a wordless correction. Stand still, look appropriate. Perform. She performed. The reception was held in the estate's garden, which Emma's mother had transformed into something that belonged in a magazine. String lights, white roses, long tables with linen runners, string quartet that shifted to a DJ set after the dinner service. 300 guests, the kind of guest list that included senators' wives and venture capital partners and a former ambassador who had known Emma's grandfather. Emma moved through it all the way she had learned to move through every public event with Daniel purposefully, but never too independently. She spoke when spoken to. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Daniel's arm twice in casual gestures that she knew he appreciated because they demonstrated to anyone watching that she was his. It was during the cocktail hour, approximately 90 minutes into the reception, that things began to shift. Daniel had been drinking. Not obviously, Daniel was never obvious, but she knew the signs. The particular looseness in his jaw, the way his charm became slightly more effortful, more deliberate, as if he were applying it manually rather than deploying it naturally. He was in a corner with his father, Parrington, 2 other men Emma recognized as business associates. She could tell from the set of his shoulders that the conversation was not going well. She had learned over 5 years to track that specific energy from across a crowded room. It was a survival skill. When Daniel's conversations did not go well, the cost eventually transferred somewhere. She knew it would transfer to her. She told herself to stay visible, stay calm, stay in groups. She found her mother and stood with her for a while, listening to a conversation about the florist, listening to a conversation about the centerpieces, keeping her peripheral attention on Daniel the entire time. Then Claire appeared. Her sister grabbed her hand and pulled her slightly aside, her veil tilt from dancing, her cheeks flushed. Em, I need you for 5 minutes. Come on, Claire, I really should. 5 minutes. You're my maid of honor, and I haven't barely talked to you all day. Come on. And Emma, for just those 5 minutes, let herself be pulled. let herself be pulled into the warm orbit of her sister's happiness, standing with her behind the main tent where the catering staff was setting up the dessert station, listening to Claire talk about how James had whispered something in her ear during the first dance that made her cry, and she was absolutely not going to tell anyone what it was yet, but maybe later. Emma laughed, a real laugh, the kind she almost never produced anymore. Small and startled and real. There she is, Claire said quietly, looking at her. There's my sister. Emma looked at her. I'm right here. Claire held her gaze for a moment, and something moved through her sister's expression, a shadow of something older and more searching than the joy of a wedding day. Are you really? The question hung between them. Claire, you can tell me, you know. Claire lowered her voice. Whatever it is, whatever's happening, you can tell me. Emma felt the ground shift under her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the heels she was wearing. She felt the thing she always felt when someone got close to the real question, a bolt of something between terror and longing, so powerful it physically hurt. Tell her. The thought moved through her like a current. Tell her, this is your sister. Tell her, minus a hand landed on Emma's shoulder. There you are. Daniel's voice was pleasant, hearty pleasant. I've been looking for you. He stepped between them with a smile that Claire received as warmth and Emma received as a door closing. Sorry to steal her, Claire. Congratulations again, you look absolutely stunning. He turned the smile on Emma. The Harrington partners want to say hello. You know how Bradley gets when he thinks he's being neglected. Emma looked at her sister. Claire was looking at Daniel with the expression most people wore when they looked at Daniel, that particular softening that his charm produced. Then she glanced back at Emma, and for just a fraction of a second, Emma saw something flicker in her sister's eyes that she couldn't quite read. Of course, Claire said. We were just finishing up. Daniel guided Emma back toward the main reception with his hand at her elbow. Not gripping, just present, a reminder. What were you talking about? He asked quietly. Her wedding day. Emma kept her voice flat, her husband. Happy things, good. His hand tightened briefly. Keep it that way. It happened an hour later. Guests had moved inside as the evening temperature dropped, and the estate's formal sitting room had been opened to accommodate the overflow. Emma slipped away from a conversation about real estate markets that she had no interest in and no business being part of, and she found a quiet corridor that led to the back of the house, where the storage rooms and utility spaces were. She needed 3 minutes alone, just 3 minutes where she was not performing. She found an unlocked storage room, old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, a rack of garment bags, and she slipped inside and let the door click shut behind her. Darkness, she let her shoulders drop. She let her face stop doing anything. She just breathed. She had been in that room for perhaps 90 seconds when the door opened. Daniel filled the doorframe. He had found her in less than 2 minutes. He always found her. What are you doing? He asked. I needed air. You needed air. He stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind him. We have 300 guests outside. My father's partnership contact is asking questions about why my wife keeps disappearing. And you needed air. Daniel, you were talking to Claire. His voice dropped. I could see it in her face when I walked over. What did you say to her? Nothing. I told you. Don't. The word was very quiet and very final. Don't lie to me tonight. I am in a very difficult position right now, Emma, and I need you to be what I need you to be. That is all. That is the only thing I am asking you to do. I didn't say anything to her. You were about to. He stepped closer. I could see it. I always see it. You forget that. A pause. What exactly were you planning to say? Emma's heart was hammering against her ribs with the force of something trying to break out. Her hands were cold. Her mouth was dry. She had been in this room, not this specific room, but this room in all its variations, this conversation in all its versions, so many times that her body knew the geography of it the way it knew the geography of a recurring nightmare. I wasn't planning anything, she said. It was a conversation between sisters on her wedding day. That is all it was. Good, he was very close now. Then we agree. Because I would hate for today to be memorable for the wrong reasons. The way he said memorable. The way he let that word sit in the air between them. Emma had heard that word in that tone in hospital, waiting rooms, and lonely parking lots, and locked bedrooms for 4 years and 11 months. Something happened inside her in that moment, something she couldn't have predicted and couldn't have explained. Something that had been building for a very long time, in the way that nothing happens all at once, that earthquakes begin as pressure in places nobody can see. The moment of rupture is never the beginning, but only the place where the beginning finally runs out of room. She thought of Claire's face. There's my sister. She thought of what it would look like 20 years to look back at today and know that she had been standing in a storage room while her sister danced. She had nodded and agreed and worn her smile and gone back out to perform for 300 more minutes. She thought of a rainy night several months ago and a dog bleeding on the side of the highway and a man who had given her his phone number and said words that she had carried in her hidden pocket every single day since. Whatever happens, whatever time it is, call me. Daniel was still talking. She could hear his voice, the precise, controlled way he constructed sentences when he wanted to make sure she understood the full consequence of her situation without using a single word that could ever be repeated in front of witnesses. She reached into the hidden pocket inside her bridesmaid's dress. Her fingers found the folded piece of paper. Emma. His voice sharpened. Are you listening to me? I'm listening, she said. With her other hand, she typed a number she had memorized. She had memorized it the same week she received it, the same way she had memorized every piece of information she had ever needed to protect herself, quietly and completely, and without telling a single person. The phone rang once. Emma, a voice she had only heard a handful of times, but that she recognized, completely calm, low. The voice of a man who did not perform steadiness but simply possessed it. Daniel was still speaking. He hadn't noticed. He was looking at her face, not her hands. She turned slightly away from him. Can you come get me? She whispered. Briefest pause. Tell me where you are. She said the name of her family's estate. She said it quickly and quietly, while Daniel's voice paused, and she heard the shift in his breathing that meant he had finally registered that she was speaking to someone. Emma. Daniel's voice changed entirely, hard and cold and immediate. Who is that? Give me the phone. He reached for it. She said, please hurry. And then Daniel took the phone from her hand. He looked at the screen. He looked at the name she had saved into her contacts, not a real name, just two letters, V, C, and he canceled the call. He looked at her with an expression she had seen only a handful of times before, and each time it had preceded the worst moments of her life. He said, very quietly, as Emma met his eyes. For the first time in a long time, she did not look away. Someone who's coming, she said. She didn't know, standing in that storage room, that the call had lasted long enough. She didn't know that 11 seconds of audio had already done its work. She didn't know that the voice she had heard, calm, immediate, certain, had already set in motion a series of events that would change not just her evening, but the entire architecture of the life she had by inside. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that Daniel took her arm and walked her back into the reception and seated her at the family table and picked up his wine glass and resumed the performance as if nothing had happened. She knew that she sat beside him and made her face do what it was supposed to do and nodded at the right moments. But something was different. Something had shifted. Because for the first time in 4 years and 11 months, Emma Whitmore was not waiting for her situation to get better or get worse, or somehow resolve itself the way she had always told herself it eventually would. She was waiting for something specific. She was waiting for a sound she had only heard once before at a distance on the night she found a wounded dog on the side of a California highway. The sound of motorcycles. And somewhere across the city, heading toward the Whitmore family estate in Montecito, a line of Hell's Angels riders were doing exactly what their president had told them to do. They were riding for someone who needed them. They didn't know the details. They didn't know the name. They didn't need to. Vincent Callahan had looked at his brothers in that clubhouse and said 5 words in the steady, quiet voice that 15 grown men had learned over years to recognize as the voice that required no argument and no explanation. We ride, he said, someone needs us. And every engine in that room came to life. Emma pressed her thumbnail into her palm under the table. A habit. A quiet private signal to herself that she was still there, that she was still present, that she had not yet disappeared all the way into the performance. Beside her, Daniel was laughing at something his father said. She breathed. She waited. She was still there. The table was set for 30, and Emma was sitting at it like a woman already buried. She could feel Daniel's elbow touching hers, not pressing, not gripping. Just present the way he was always just present. That permanent gravitational nearness that let her know at every moment exactly where he was and exactly what she was permitted to do. She picked up her water glass. She set it back down. She smiled at something Claire's new mother-in-law said from across the table, a comment about the floral arrangements, and the smile felt like lifting something heavy with her face. Nobody noticed. That was the thing she had long ago stopped being surprised by. Nobody ever noticed. Not because the people around her were cruel or careless. Some of them were genuinely good people, but because Daniel was exceptionally skilled at creating a surface so polished, so plausible, so warm at every visible edge that the space behind it was simply invisible. Don't look for what you've been given no reason to look for. That was the logic Emma had spent years understanding. That was the system she had been living inside. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm under the table and thought about the phone call. 11 seconds, maybe 12. She had said the address. She had said, "Please hurry." Then the phone was gone. Daniel was back inside his performance. And the question that was burning through her with every passing minute was the one she had no way of answering. Been enough? Call connected long enough? Had the voice on the other end caught all of it? She didn't know. What she knew was that Vincent Callahan had answered on the first ring. She knew what that meant, even if she hadn't fully understood it when it happened. She had replayed that moment so many times in the past 4 years, the night she had found his dog, the animal clinic, the conversation that followed, that she had worn the memory smooth, the way you wear smooth a stone you carry in your pocket. She could not have explained, to anyone who asked, why she had saved his number, why she had transferred it from slip of paper to memory to a new phone when Daniel made her replace her old one, why she had kept it in the hidden pocket of this dress, specifically when she had chosen the pocket the week prior while packing for the wedding. She would have said, if someone pressed her, that she simply felt safer knowing it was there. The way you feel safer knowing where the fire exits are in a building you hope never catches fire. Truth, the thing underneath that truth that she had not yet found the language for, was something more complicated. Something she had learned on a rainy night on a California highway when she was alone and frightened and the animal in front of her had looked at her with eyes that asked nothing except, "Please don't leave." She had not left. She had stayed and called the clinic and used money she had hidden from Daniel, and she had stayed until she knew the dog was going to be all right. Afterwards, sitting in the waiting area of that small veterinary clinic at 11:30 at night, she had felt for the first time she could not remember how long like herself. Like the person she had been before she disappeared. She had not expected anyone to come. And then Vincent Callahan had walked through the door. She had known his name before she met him. It was the kind of name that existed in the background of communities, the way certain presences exist. You knew roughly what it referred to without ever having dealt with it directly. The Hells Angels chapter that operated in the broader county area was not invisible. They were not hidden. They rode in daylight. They patronized local businesses. They occasionally showed up at charity runs and toy drives and community events in a way that confused people who had rigid ideas about what that particular affiliation was supposed to look like. Emma's husband had strong opinions about them, which meant Emma had heard strong opinions about them for years. The opinions were the kind that came from a particular class of person who had never been in the same room as the thing they were opining about. Daniel used words like criminal element and civic liability, and it says something about a community when those people are allowed to operate openly. Said these things at dinner parties, and Emma nodded along because it was easier and because none of it felt real to her. It was the kind of conversation that existed in a register of life she was not actually living. Then she was standing in a veterinary clinic waiting room at nearly midnight, and the door opened, and Vincent Callahan walked in. He was not what the dinner party conversations had led her to expect. That was her first coherent thought. He was tall, genuinely tall, Not the kind of tall that people described as tall when they meant average, and he moved through the doorway with the particular economy of a person who had learned long ago not to waste energy on anything unnecessary. He wore the cut she recognized from what she'd seen at a distance. Face, the kind of face that had been through things and had arrived on the other side of them without losing its fundamental steadiness. She would have put him at somewhere between 45 and 55, and she later learned she was not wrong. He looked at the front desk and said, "I got a call about a dog. Black lab injured. I think he's mine." The receptionist looked at him, then looked at Emma, then said, "The woman who brought him in is right there." Turned. She stood up. She had braced herself in the half second between his turning and looking at her for the version of this person that Daniel's dinner parties had constructed. She did not receive that version. What she received was a man who looked at her with an attention that was not intimidating, but rather the opposite, the kind of attention that felt like being actually seen rather than assessed. "You found him?" he said. "He was on the shoulder of the highway," Emma said. "He couldn't get up. I didn't know who he belonged to. His tags had come off, so I brought him here." Pause. Something moved through Vincent Callahan's expression, something she couldn't read precisely, but that looked, if she had to name it, like a relief so profound it had temporarily displaced everything else. "He gonna be all right?" he asked. The vet said yes. She said he's going to be fine. It looks like he was clipped by a vehicle. But nothing internal, nothing. She stopped. She had been talking quickly, the way she tended to talk when she was nervous, and she made herself slow down. "Going to be okay." Vincent exhaled. It was a small sound. Single breath released after being held. The intimacy of it, the humanness of it, the way it made visible, for just a moment, what the past few hours had cost this man did something to Emma that she was not prepared for. She felt her throat tighten with a sympathy so sudden and clean that it surprised her. "Thank you," he said. He said it simply, without performance, the way people say things when they mean them exactly and have no energy left over for decorating them. "I mean that. Thank you." "I couldn't leave him," Emma said. Then, because it was true, and because she was exhausted, and because something about the moment made honesty feel suddenly very easy, "I couldn't leave him there alone." Vincent looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. Not too long. He was not that kind of person. She would come to understand. Did not hold gazes past the point of comfort or use sustained eye contact as a form of pressure. But in that moment, he looked at her, and she had the unsettling and oddly freeing sensation of being looked at by someone who was seeing not the performance, but the person behind it. "You waited 2 hours," he said. It wasn't a question. The receptionist must have told him. "I wanted to make sure he was stable before I left." He nodded slowly. "Do you want something? Coffee? There's a machine in the—" "I'm fine. Thank you." She picked up her purse. "I should get home." He nodded again. He stepped slightly aside, clearing the path to the door in a gesture that was so instinctively considerate she almost stopped walking. She almost got to the door when he said, "Hey." She turned. He was looking at her with that same direct, undecorated attention. "Pay my debts," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever you need. If you're ever in a situation where you need someone, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what time you call me. All right?" She almost said she wouldn't need it. She almost said, "That's very kind. The way you say things when you're performing normal and reassured and completely fine." Instead, something stopped her. Something made her hold still in the doorway and look back at him and simply say, "Okay." He took a card from his jacket, and then he looked at it, and he took a pen from the front desk, and he wrote a second number on the back. "That one," he said, pointing to the handwritten number, "goes directly to me. No one else." Anytime she took the card. She did not look at it until she was in her car with the door closed, and when she did, she sat there for a long moment in the parking lot reading the number he had written in handwriting that was unexpectedly careful. She thought, "I am never going to need this." She had transferred it to memory within 48 hours. The family table, someone was proposing a toast. Emma raised her glass at the right moment and brought it to her lips without drinking and set it back down. Daniel raised his glass beside her with the easy warmth of a man in his natural element, and she watched him from the side of her vision and thought about the 11 seconds on the phone. She thought, He heard the address. She thought, the question is whether 11 seconds was enough. Then a new thought arrived, one that she had been keeping at a careful distance because engaging with it too directly felt dangerous. The thought was this: even if Vincent came, what then? What would happen? What could happen? 300 guests, powerful family, Daniel's father's connections, the entire superstructure of wealth and influence and reputation that Daniel had been carefully constructing for years to insulate himself from accountability. What was a Hells Angels president going to do against all of that? She didn't have an answer. She was not sure she needed one yet. What she found turning the thought over was something she had not felt in such a long time that she almost didn't recognize it at first. It was small and new, and slightly terrifying in the way that new things are always terrifying when you have spent years in a place where nothing new was permitted. Felt like possibility. The toast ended. Music resumed. Couples moved toward the dance floor, and the pleasant machinery of a wedding reception continued its operation, and Emma sat very still inside it. Daniel leaned toward her, close enough that no one at the table could hear him. "Father wants us on the dance floor," he said. "In about 5 minutes. "All right," she said. And Emma. A pause. "We're going to talk about your little phone call later. Tonight, when we're back in our room." She kept her face completely still. "There's nothing to talk about. Let me decide that." His smile didn't change at all. 5 minutes. Be ready. Pushed back from the table and moved toward his father's group, collecting handshakes and laughter as he went. Emma watched him go with the specific, exhausted clarity of a woman who has been studying a dangerous thing for long enough that she no longer has any illusions about what it is. Tonight, when we're back in our room, she knew what that meant. She had been in that room before. She knew exactly what the shape of later tonight would look like in the particular way that only people who have survived those rooms could know. She felt something harden inside her that had nothing to do with courage. Courage was the wrong word. Courage was the romantic version, and everything to do with a much simpler and more fundamental thing. She was done. Not brave, not suddenly strong, just done. The way a person reaches the end of something, not because they have become greater than it, but simply because they have run out of the capacity to continue carrying it. She was 29 years old, and she had nothing left to give to the performance. She had pressed her thumbnail into her palm for the last time. She thought about Vincent Callahan's voice on the phone. "Tell me where you are. No hesitation, no clarifying questions. No, let me understand the situation. Are you sure about this? Or maybe we should think it through. Just tell me where you are." The simple, immediate orientation of a person who has already decided that when someone asks for help, the correct response is to help them. She thought about the dog on the side of the highway. She thought about herself at 11:30 at night, sitting in a veterinary waiting room because she could not leave something alone that was hurting. She thought about Vincent looking at her and saying, "I couldn't leave him there alone." No, that was what she had said. But his expression in that moment had looked like recognition. The music shifted to something slower, and Daniel reappeared at her elbow. "Time," he said. She stood. She let him take her hand and lead her toward the dance floor. She moved with him in the precise, mechanical way that she had perfected. Over his shoulder, she watched the entrance of the estate's main hall with a steadiness that she held carefully, like something fragile and essential. Nothing yet. Daniel's hand was at her back. He was speaking close to her ear, not the threatening voice, not now, not in front of everyone, the charming voice, the party voice, the voice that had convinced her at a charity gala 5 years ago that she had found something real. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured. She said nothing. A little more warmth would help. "Bradley's wife keeps looking over here." She tilted her face toward his and produced the expression. "Perfect," he said. And over his shoulder, through the glass doors at the far end of the hall, she thought she was almost certain that she heard something. Very distant, barely there. The kind of sound that in a different context, on a different night, she might have dismissed entirely. Low rolling vibration and engine. Then two. Then, building from somewhere down the estate road, something that was not quite sound anymore, but frequency felt as much as heard, moving through the floor, through the air, through the chest of every person in the room, whether they consciously registered it yet or not. Daniel felt it too. She could tell because his hand at her back went briefly, involuntarily still. "What is that?" he said. Emma looked over his shoulder at the glass doors. She said, very quietly, with the first completely natural smile she had produced all day, "Someone I called." Daniel went absolutely rigid. The music continued. Guests continued. The sound was growing, unmistakably, undeniably, possibly growing, and heads were beginning to turn toward the windows and the doors. Someone near the back said something that Emma couldn't hear, and then someone else said it louder. "Are those motorcycles?" Daniel pulled back from her. Face had changed in a way she had never seen before and never expected to see, not the controlled anger, not the cold precision, but something rawer and less managed. Something that looked, beneath the surface of it, like the beginning of fear. "Emma," he said. She held his eyes. She did not press her thumbnail into her palm. She did not look away. "Emma, what did you do?" The glass doors at the far end of the hall opened. Vincent Callahan walked through them. He was not alone. Behind him, through the doorway, the sound was enormous, a whole line of bikes. Engines settling to idle in the estate's front drive, riders who had not been invited and did not need to be. Vincent himself walked through those doors, without rushing, without aggression, without any of the theater that the room had unconsciously braced itself for. He walked the way he always walked, with the economy of a man who had learned long ago that real authority didn't need to perform itself. Scanned the room, found Emma. He crossed to her with the directness of someone moving through a space that is simply in between him and where he needs to be. The crowd parted not because he demanded it, but because people instinctively understood, the way that bodies understand things before minds do, that this was not someone you stood in front of unnecessarily. Stopped in front of her. He looked at her face for a moment, the way he had looked at her face in a veterinary waiting room, without decoration, without performance, without anything except seeing what was actually there. "You called," he said. "I called," she said. He nodded once. Then he looked at Daniel Whitmore, and his expression did not change at all. But Daniel took a half step backward and then appeared to become very aware that he had taken a half step backward and stopped. "This is a private family event," Daniel said. His voice was doing the thing it did when he was exerting control, measured, authoritative, calibrated to remind the room who had social standing here. "You need to leave." Vincent looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at Emma. "Do you want to leave?" he asked her. The room was very quiet now. The music had stopped. Emma wasn't sure exactly when, but it had. 300 people were watching. She could feel it. Her mother, her sister, Daniel's father, the Harrington partners, all of them watching. This was the moment. She understood that completely. This was the moment that everything before had been moving toward and everything after would move away from. There was no going back to the performance from here. There was no version of this moment that allowed her to step back into the invisible room and close the door and continue surviving the way she had been surviving. She had known that when she dialed the number. She looked at Vincent. She looked at the steadiness in his face, the complete absence of pressure in his expression. He was not telling her what to do. He was simply making it possible for her to do what she chose. She thought about 4 years and 11 months, and a thumb pressed into a palm and a smile rehearsed for 3 weeks, and a woman in a mirror who had once argued passionately and stayed at the table long after everyone else left. She thought about a dog on the side of a highway who had looked at her with eyes that asked nothing except, "Please don't leave." She looked at Vincent Callahan and she said yes. And then she looked at her sister. Claire was standing at the edge of the dance floor in her wedding dress, and her face-to-face Emma had been watching and protecting and performing for all day was doing something unexpected. Claire was not confused. Claire was not frightened. Claire was looking at Emma with an expression that looked, more than anything else, like relief. Like she had been holding her breath for longer than one day and had finally been given permission to let it go. Claire said, from across the room, her voice thick, "Go." Emma Whitmore picked up nothing. She took nothing with her except the person she had been before she disappeared and had been quietly carrying inside her survival the entire time, waiting. She walked out of the hall with Vincent Callahan beside her and the sound of every engine outside rising to meet her like something that had been waiting a long time to be called. Daniel's voice came from behind her. Emma. Emma, if you walk out of here. She did not stop. She did not look back. She walked through the glass doors and out into the night. The air hit her face. The sound of the motorcycles was everywhere. The men on those bikes, 15, 16, she didn't count, were watching her with the same steady attention their president had. Not threatening, not performing, just present. Present in the particular way of people who have been told that someone needed protecting and have arrived to do exactly that. One of them, a man with gray at his temples, who looked like someone's grandfather, if someone's grandfather had forearms the size of a person's calves, caught her eye and nodded once. A small gesture, the kind that meant we've got you. Emma nodded back. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She was not pressing her thumbnail into her palm. She stood in the night air of the Montecito estate, where she had grown up, where she had learned to swim and argue and stay at the table. She breathed in the cold and the darkness and the smell of engine oil and night-blooming jasmine. She was, for the first time in 4 years and 11 months, simply and completely and irreversibly herself. Behind her, through the glass doors, she could hear Daniel's voice rising. She could hear other voices responding to it. She could hear the particular sound of a carefully constructed story beginning to encounter the resistance of a room full of witnesses who were no longer entirely sure what they were witnessing. And underneath all of it, steady and patient and real, she could hear something else. Something that had started 6 months ago on a rainy highway, and a wounded animal, and a man who had said, "I pay my debts." Something that had started long before that, the part of Emma Whitmore that had refused, through everything, had to completely extinguish the knowledge of who she actually was. The engines idled. The night was cold and clear, and Emma, for the first time and longer than she could calculate, was not waiting for anything at all. Daniel Whitmore had never, in his entire adult life, lost control of a room. That was the thing people did not understand about men like Daniel, the thing that made them so effective and so invisible for so long. It wasn't cruelty that sustained them. Cruelty was blunt, detectable, easy to name. Sustained men like Daniel was control. The meticulous, patient, architectural management of every room they entered, every conversation they touched, every narrative that came within reach of their influence. Daniel had been building rooms for 15 years. He had built the room of his marriage. He had built the room of his professional reputation. He had built the room of his family's social standing. Brick by careful brick, he had learned which walls to reinforce and which doors to lock, and exactly how much light to let in, so that everything inside looked warm and legitimate and completely, unassailably real. Never lost a room. But the room he was standing in, now his mother-in-law's formal reception hall, 300 guests, white rose string lights going slightly blurry in his peripheral vision, this room was no longer his. He could feel it happening. That was the worst part, the part he would replay later in the sleepless stretches of the nights that followed. He could feel the precise moment it began to slip. It was the sound of the motorcycles outside. Not the sight, not yet. Just the sound, building from nothing into something unavoidable. The way that sound moved through the room's attention. The way a frequency moves through water, invisibly at first, then all at once. He had looked at Emma's face when the sound started. He had expected to find fear there. Fear was the reliable thing. Fear was the thing he had learned to depend on, to calibrate his behavior against, to use as confirmation that the system was still operating correctly. 5 years of very precise and very patient work, and the instrument he had relied on most consistently was Emma's fear. Face had not been afraid. It had been the face of a woman who had been waiting. That was when Daniel Whitmore felt, for the first time, the specific sensation of standing on ground that was no longer solid. It was not dramatic. It was not like the movies. It was a small, interior shift. Tiny fracture had, like a tiny fracture running through the foundation of something he had believed was unbreakable. Terrifying thing about it was not the fracture itself, but the sudden, vertiginous understanding that the fracture had been there for longer than he knew. Now Emma was gone, and the room was looking at him. Father, Richard Whitmore, appeared at his elbow. Richard was 71, silver-haired, spent 50 years building a business empire on the principle that every situation had a correct move and that the ability to identify that move faster than everyone else was the only form of intelligence that actually mattered. He looked at his son with an expression that Daniel recognized had been recognizing since childhood as the expression Richard wore when he was calculating the cost of something. "Daniel," his father said quietly, "what is happening?" "A misunderstanding," Daniel said. "Emma's been under a lot of stress. I'll handle it. There are motorcycles in your in-laws' driveway." "I'm aware of that, Dad. There are Hell's Angels in your in-laws' driveway, Daniel." The quietness of his father's voice was not gentleness. Richard Whitmore had never been gentle a day in his life. The quietness was the particular controlled fury of a man who has just watched something he owns decrease in value. "Who is that man? How does Emma know him?" "She doesn't," Daniel said. "She barely knows him. It's nothing. It doesn't look like nothing." Richard's eyes moved to the glass doors, where the shape of Emma and the Hells Angels president were visible through the glass. "Looks like your wife just walked out of your sister-in-law's wedding with another man in front of 300 people. I said I'll handle it, Daniel." His father's hand on his arm. "Not comfort, wait. I need you to understand what is at stake tonight. The Harrington deal closes in 11 days. Bradley Harrington is standing 15 feet from you right now watching whatever this is. There is a scene. There won't be a scene. Then go out there and end it. Quietly. Do you understand me? Whatever this is, you end it quietly and you bring your wife back inside, and this evening continues without another word about it." Daniel looked at his father's hand on his arm. He looked at the glass doors. He looked at the 300 guests who were doing the very human thing of pretending to resume their conversations while keeping every possible sensory channel oriented toward what was happening. "Fine," he said. He straightened his jacket. He produced the expression, the confident, reasonable. I've got this expression that had served him in boardrooms and legal depositions and marriage counseling sessions with a therapist he had vetted beforehand to ensure the correct outcome. He moved toward the glass doors. Behind him, he heard his father say, very quietly, to no one in particular, 11 days. Outside, the cold hit him immediately. He counted the bikes, 16, 17, including the one that had been left nearest the door, engine still ticking as it cooled. He did not look at the riders directly. He had learned from decades of professional experience that the worst thing you could do in a power situations was acknowledge a threat before you had assessed whether acknowledging it cost you more than ignoring it. He focused on Emma. She was standing beside the Hells Angels president Vincent. He had gotten the name from one of the estate's security contractors who had been tracking the arrivals on his radio, and she was not looking at Daniel. She was looking at something in the middle distance, and her posture was wrong. Not wrong badly. Wrong in a way that only he would notice, a way that required 5 years of studying her to detect. She was not bracing herself. That was what was wrong. Every time Daniel had come toward Emma in the past 4 years, every approach, every conversation, every entry into a room where she was her body had performed a specific, nearly imperceptible preparation. Micro-adjustment of the shoulders. A slight change in the distribution of weight. Physical vocabulary of someone who had learned to be ready. She was not doing it now. She was standing in the cold in her bridesmaid's dress, with her arms slightly loose at her sides, and her face turned away from him, and she was simply standing. Without preparation, without bracing, without the elaborate invisible machinery that his presence had installed in her body over 5 years. Infuriated him in a way he did not immediately understand, and then understood too well. "Emma," he said. He kept his voice the reasonable version, concerned husband version, the one that worked best in front of witnesses. "Come inside, it's cold." She looked at him then, and the thing about her expression, the thing that landed on him with the force of something he had no category for, was that it was not angry, was not triumphant or defiant in the way he had constructed responses to the adversarial emotions he had prepared for. It was calm. It was simply completely calm. The calm of a person who has passed through a door and allowed it to close behind them and is no longer interested in what's on the other side. "No," she said, one word, flat, no performance in it. Daniel looked at Vincent Callahan. "I'm not sure who you are or what she told you," he said, but this is a private and family matter. I'm asking you to leave my family's property." Vincent looked at him for a moment. He had a way of looking. Daniel registered this with the professional attention of a man who studied leverage that was neither aggressive nor deferential, simply attentive. The look of someone who has heard what you said and is deciding how much of it deserves a response. "Her family's property," Vincent said. A small thing. 4 words. But they landed precisely because they were precise, not an insult, not a provocation, just a correction. The kind of correction that worked exactly because it was true, and because everyone within earshot knew it was true. Daniel felt the ground shift again. "Emma," he said. And now there was something under the reasonable voice, something he was not fully controlling. "I need you to think very carefully about what you're doing right now. What this looks like. What the consequences are." Emma looked at him with that same calm. "You recorded yourself." The night went very quiet. Not metaphorically. Actually quiet, as if the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees and taken the ambient sound with it. Even the engines seemed to still. Daniel said, "What?" When I called, Emma's voice was steady and unhurried. "The phone recorded. I didn't know it at the time. I found out approximately 40 minutes ago." A pause that she let sit in the air with complete deliberateness. Vincent heard everything. Daniel's face did something then that his face in 15 years of professional performance had never done in public. Cracked. Not dramatically, not the way it would happen in a film. Just a small, terrible fracturing at the edges of the composure, visible for perhaps 3 seconds before he brought it back under control. 3 seconds was enough. 3 seconds. In front of 17 Hell's Angels and the estate's security contractors and the 4 or 5 guests who had drifted toward the glass doors or pressing close enough to see was entirely enough. "That's not," he started. "I'm not going to debate it with you," Emma said. "Just telling you." Vincent had not moved, had not said a word, simply stood in his position beside Emma with the specific stillness of a man who understood that the most powerful thing he could do in this moment was absolutely nothing. Daniel looked at Vincent. "Whatever you think you heard." "I know what I heard," Vincent said. 3 more words. Same tone. Same complete absence of performance. Daniel looked from Vincent to Emma and back. Behind the composure he was very rapidly rebuilding, there was, she could see it, she had always been able to read it. She'd spent 5 years learning to read it as a survival mechanism, a furious recalculation taking place. He was not done. He was not by any means ready to concede anything to anyone. He was regrouping. He was finding the next position. "You need to understand," Daniel said. Now his voice had shifted to the one he used in depositions, measured, almost sorrowful, deeply reasonable, in the particular way that made people who didn't know him feel that they were speaking with the only adult in the room. "That my wife has been dealing with serious emotional difficulties for some time. I have been supporting her through this. This is not what you're seeing here, is not what it appears to be." "Emma has constructed a narrative, Daniel," Emma said. He stopped. "The phone recorded," she said again. "Everything you said in that storage room. Every word." His jaw tightened. "You can't use that." I know what it is," she said. "So do you." Inside the reception hall, something was changing. Claire Whitmore Hendricks had been standing at the glass doors for the past several minutes, with her new husband's hand in hers, and her eyes fixed on the scene outside. James, to his considerable credit, had not once told her to come away from the window, or reminded her that it was their wedding night, or suggested that the situation was not their business. He had stood beside her in silence and let her watch, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which was also, she would think later, one of the first confirmations that she had married the correct person. Claire was watching. Through the glass was her sister's face. She had known something was wrong with Emma for a long time. That was the confession she had been carrying since she walked back into the reception hall from their brief conversation beside the dessert station and watched Daniel appear and take Emma's arm. She had known for a long time. She had known in the way that sisters know things not through evidence or incident or specific memory, but through the accumulated atmospheric understanding of someone you have loved your entire life. The way Emma laughed slightly too carefully now. The way she paused before she answered questions. just a half beat too long. The way you pause when you are translating something instead of just speaking. The way she never, ever complained about Daniel, which had seemed at first like loyalty and eventually like something else entirely. She had told herself she was projecting. She had told herself that Emma was happy, that Emma had chosen this, that it was not her place to interfere in her sister's marriage based on nothing more than a feeling. She had told herself this so many times that she had become very fluent in it. Now she was standing at the glass doors with her wedding dress pooling around her feet, watching her sister stand outside in the cold and look at her husband with an expression Claire had never once seen on Emma's face. She was understanding with the totality and irreversibility of understanding that cannot be undone once it arrives that she had been telling herself a story. "James," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I need to go out there." Didn't hesitate. "Okay. You don't have to come." "I know," he said. And he opened the door. They went out together. The moment Claire stepped outside, Emma looked over. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that had no language, because it predated language, the specific communication of two people who grew up in the same house and knew each other's faces better than their own. Claire crossed the distance between them without looking at Daniel, without acknowledging Vincent, without addressing the 17 motorcycles or the riders or any of the external strangeness of the situation, and she took her sister's face in her hands. "Sorry," Claire said. Her voice broke immediately, and she let it. "Em, I'm so sorry. I should have. I knew something was..." "Claire." Emma's voice was still steady, but something in her eyes had changed at the sight of her sister's face. Very last layer of the composure was going soft. "You didn't know." I did know. I felt it, and I told myself I was wrong, and You're here now," Emma said. "That's what matters." Claire pulled her sister into her arms and held on. Emma held back. The two of them stood there in the cold with the engines. And the night around them, the sound Claire made was not graceful or controlled. It was the ugly, wrenching sound of a person releasing a grief they have been storing in the wrong place for years. And Emma, in her sister's arms, finally let her face do exactly what it needed to do. Nobody spoke, not Vincent, not James, not the writers. Some things needed their space. It was Richard Whitmore who broke it. He had come through the glass doors with the purposeful, measured stride of a man who has spent a lifetime walking into difficult rooms and reconfiguring them to his advantage. Behind him, Bradley Harrington, the partner, Deal, the 11 days, and Harrington's wife followed at a careful distance, the way powerful people follow other powerful people into uncertain situations, close enough to observe and far enough to maintain deniability. This, Richard Whitmore said, driving in the space between his son and the cluster of women, is a family matter. I am going to ask everyone who is not family to please step aside and allow us to... Daniel's voice was tight. A warning. What I am saying. Richard continued, directing himself toward Vincent with the confident authority of a man addressing someone he has categorized and dismissed simultaneously. Is that whatever my daughter-in-law has told you, whatever story she has constructed, my family is more than capable of resolving its internal matters internally. Do not need Richard. It was Emma's mother, Patricia Whitmore, who had come to the doors without anyone noticing. Her voice was quiet and carried anyway. She was 63 years old and had hosted diplomatic events and charity galas, and had once spoken calmly to a man who was attempting to blackmail her late husband. She had a quality that her daughters had both inherited in different measures, a stillness that could in the right moment stop a room. Richard looked at her. "Step back," Patricia said. "Patricia, I'm handling..." "You are not handling anything." Patricia moved to stand beside her daughters. She looked at Emma. She looked at her face, really looked, with the eyes of a mother who was finally allowing herself to see the things she had been circling for longer than she wanted to admit. Emma. Her voice changed completely on her daughter's name. Authority dissolved into something much older and much simpler. "Baby, what has he done?" Emma opened her mouth, and Daniel said nothing. "She's confused. Don't!" Patricia said it without looking at him. She did not raise her voice. She simply said the word with a finality that ended his sentence as completely as a door closing. Then she looked at Vincent Callahan. "You're the one," she called. "Yes, ma'am," Vincent said. Patricia studied him for a moment. with the careful attention of a woman deciding something. Then she said, "Thank you for coming." Something moved across Vincent's face, brief and genuine. "She saved my dog," he said simply. Patricia nodded, as if that explanation satisfied something she had needed to understand. Then she turned back to her son-in-law. For the first time in 5 years of holiday dinners and birthday celebrations and polite, careful, deliberately uncomplicated family interactions, Patricia Whitmore looked at Daniel with no performance whatsoever. "Think," she said, "that you need to leave." The word moved through the assembled guests, who had drifted close enough to hear like a stone dropped into still water. Concentric rings of silence. Daniel straightened. He was still in there, the constructed self, the composed professional, the man who had never lost a room. He was reaching for it. "Patricia," he said, and his voice was almost steady. "I understand that you're upset. I understand I know what this looks like. But there is a great deal about Emma's situation that you don't know, and I would strongly encourage everyone here to allow us to have a private adult conversation before anyone makes any decisions they can't take back." He looked at the guests. He looked at Harrington. He was doing it even now. Even here, he was doing the thing he had always done, trying to shift the weight of the room back in his direction to make himself the reasonable center of gravity. "Emma's been struggling," he said, "mentally. She's been in a very difficult place, and I have been trying to support her and get her the help she needs. And what you're seeing tonight it's a crisis. It's not what it looks like. It's a crisis. And the kindest thing anyone can do right now is let me take her home, and that's not going to happen," Vincent said. Daniel turned to look at him. Vincent's expression had not changed. It was exactly what it had been for the past 20 minutes, attentive, steady, completely without performance. "She's not going anywhere with you tonight. You have no legal authority to." "I'm not claiming any." Vincent looked at him with the patient attention of a man who has been in enough actual dangerous situations that a man in a nice suit invoking legal authority registers as approximately nothing. "Telling you what's happening." Daniel looked around the space. He looked at his father, Richard, whose face had gone carefully neutral in the way that Richard's face went neutral when he was watching a loss occur and had switched his attention entirely to containing it. He looked at Harrington, who had taken one step back and whose wife had taken two. He looked at the guests crowded against the glass. He looked at Emma, who was standing in her sister's arms and not looking at him at all. He had lost the room, not in the way rooms normally went against him, not through argument or evidence or the slow accumulation of contrary opinion. He had lost it the way structures lose integrity all at once, and then the collapse so complete it was hard to remember what had been standing there. He tried one more time. It was almost admirable, the way he kept trying. "Almost. Emma." His voice dropped, just the two of them despite the crowd. Private voice, the voice that had worked so many times. "Look at me." She looked at him. "You know what this is going to cost you," he said quietly. "You know what I will do. Everything we've built. Everything your family." "Play it," Emma said. He stopped. "Play the recording, Vincent," she said. She hadn't looked away from Daniel's eyes. "Let's let everyone hear it." Silence. Daniel's jaw moved once, a single muscle betraying. "Emma, let's let your father hear it," she said. "Let's let Bradley Harrington hear it. Let's let my mother and my sister and every person standing within earshot hear exactly what you said to me in that storage room 40 minutes ago. Word for word, let's do that." The silence was total. 300 people, or the significant portion of them who had migrated toward the glass doors and the cold night air, were perfectly, absolutely still. Vincent reached into his jacket. Daniel said, "Wait, just that, just wait." The single, terminal word of a man who has run out of room. Vincent paused. Daniel looked at his father. Father was looking back at him with an expression that contained a lifetime's worth of communication, compressed into 2 seconds, the communication of a man who had built something and was watching his son stand at the edge of destroying it and was deciding in real time how much of it he was still willing to save. Richard Whitmore looked away. It was in the end the smallest possible gesture. He simply looked away from his son toward the dark tree line at the edge of the property, and in doing so communicated everything that needed to be communicated. Daniel was alone. He was standing in the driveway of his in-laws' estate in his good suit with his expensive watch and his 15 years of carefully constructed architecture, and the architecture had come down around him, and there was no one standing in it with him. Father was looking at trees. His business partners were stepping back. His wife was in her sister's arms. And a Hells Angels president was standing 12 feet away, holding a phone with 11 seconds of audio on it, and everyone present understood in the wordless, atmospheric way that crowds understand things that the audio was the least of it. The audio was almost irrelevant, because what the crowd had already witnessed in real time was the man, not the constructed version, the actual one. Standing in the cold, trying to talk his way out of a room he had already lost, voice dropping to a register of private threat, even now, even here, even in front of all of these witnesses. They had seen him. That was what he had spent 15 years preventing. They had simply seen him. Emma, he said, one more time. His voice had finally lost its instrument. It was flat and depleted. In it, she could hear, stripped of all the architecture, what underneath. Not remorse, not love. Just the exhausted, furious, disoriented sound of a person encountering for the first time the absolute limit of their control. Don't do this. Emma looked at her husband for a long time. She thought about the mirror this morning, the rehearsed smile, the thumbnail pressed into the palm. 4 years and 11 months. She thought about the woman she had been at 24, while passionate and loud, and convinced that the world rewarded goodness with goodness. She thought about what it had taken to survive losing her, and what it had cost, and what she had pressed down and covered over and learned to call by other names. She thought about a dog on a highway, looking at her. She thought about, please don't leave. She had not left. She was still here. Goodbye, Daniel, she said. She turned away. She did not press her thumbnail into her palm. She moved back toward her mother and her sister and the glass doors of her family's home. And behind her she heard Daniel's breathing and the engines in the night and the specific, irreversible quiet of a story that has finally found its ending. She did not look back. She was done looking back. The house was quiet in a way that big houses get quiet after something enormous has passed through them. Caterers were still moving. The bartenders were still behind their stations. String lights were still doing what string lights do. The guests, 300 people who had arrived that evening expecting champagne and dancing and the pleasant, contained emotion of someone else's happy occasion, had rearranged themselves into the particular configuration of people who have collectively witnessed something they did not anticipate and are now processing it in real time. Clusters near the bar, clusters near the doors, people speaking in voices lower than the occasion required, the specific murmur of 300 minds running the same footage back and trying to reconcile what they'd seen with what they thought they knew. Daniel Whitmore's name was in every cluster. Ma heard fragments of it as her mother guided her through the back corridor toward the private sitting room that the family had always used for real conversations, the ones that didn't happen at dinner tables or in front of guests. She heard his name the way you hear a familiar sound from a distance, recognizable, but no longer something you need to respond to. She heard it and she kept walking. Patricia had her arm around Emma's shoulders, not the performative arm of a mother managing optics. The real one, the weight and warmth of a woman who had arrived finally at the truth of her daughter's life and was staying as close as possible to compensate for every inch of distance that truth represented. Claire walked on Emma's other side. James, 3 steps behind, had understood without being told that this was not his space to occupy, but that his presence nearby mattered, and he moved accordingly. Emma was beginning to understand, an exceptionally perceptive person. They reached the sitting room. Patricia closed the door. For a moment, none of them spoke. The 3 Whitmore women stood in the room where Patricia had told her daughters about their father's death, where Emma had announced her engagement, where Claire had once cried for 4 hours about a boy who turned out to be completely irrelevant to the actual shape of her life. And the room received them the way rooms receive the people who have deposited enough truth in them over the years. Then Claire said, "How long?" Emma sat down. She pressed her hands flat on her knees and looked at the wall, not because there was anything on it, but because a fixed point helped. Almost 5 years, she said. She heard her sister's intake of breath. She heard her mother go very still. Claire's voice. Careful and raw simultaneously. What did he, how bad was? Claire, Patricia's voice, quiet but firm. No, Mom, I need to know. She'll tell us what she needs to tell us, Patricia said, when she's ready to tell it. Right now she needs to sit. Emma looked up at her mother. Patricia Whitmore was a composed woman, had been, for as long as Emma could remember, the person in any room who maintained the most structural integrity under pressure. But her eyes right now were doing something Emma had only seen them do twice before in her life. They were the eyes of a mother confronting the specific, shattering knowledge that her child had been suffering, and she had not known the grief of not knowing, the question, the unbearable, recursive question of whether she should have. I hid it, Emma said. She said it directly because she needed her mother to hear it directly. I was very good at hiding it. You couldn't have seen what wasn't visible. Tricia's jaw moved. She sat down beside Emma and took both of her daughter's hands in hers and held them in the firm, anchoring way she had held them when Emma was 7 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. I should have looked harder, she said. Emma did not tell her she was wrong. She also did not agree. She simply held her mother's hands and let the statement rest between them like something that would require a lot more time and a lot more conversation to fully examine. And for now, that was enough. What happens now? Claire asked. Emma exhaled. Now there's a recording, she said. Witnesses and Vincent. The name settled in the room. Claire looked at her. Tell me about him. Emma had not told the full story of that night to anyone. Not to the crisis counselor she had called once, briefly, and then abandoned out of fear that Daniel would find out. Not to the friend she had confided in partially, 2 years ago, before Daniel had managed to dissolve that friendship through a campaign so gradual and so plausible that it had looked like the friendship dissolving on its own. She had carried the story of that rainy night on the highway the way she had carried everything, privately, completely, without sharing its weight. She told it now. All of it, the dog, the highway, the clinic at 11:30 at night, 2-hour wait. The moment Vincent walked through the door, and the quality of attention in his face that she had not expected and had not been able to forget. Card the number, the words he had said. He told me he paid his debts, Emma said, and I genuinely thought I would never need it. Thought it was just something people say. She paused. I had memorized the number within 2 days. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, you kept it in your dress tonight. I put it there the morning we arrived for the wedding. Don't know why. I hadn't planned anything. I put it there. You were preparing, Patricia said softly. You were preparing without knowing you were preparing. Had Emma thought about that? She thought about the hidden pocket, the folded paper, the 4 years and 11 months of staying alive inside a situation by making small, quiet decisions that preserved just enough of herself to keep going. Maybe that was what it had been. Not a plan, not courage. Just the deepest, most animal part of her, insisting on its own survival in the only language it had left. Maybe, she said. A knock at the door. They all went still. But it was James who opened it from the outside, and his face was the face of a man bringing news he needed to deliver before someone else did. Sorry to interrupt, he said. I think you need to know the police are here. 2 officers had arrived at the estate's front entrance, responding to a noise complaint from a neighbor a quarter-mile down the road who had heard the motorcycles and made a call. This happened. This was the kind of neighborhood where motorcycles past 9 p.m. generated phone calls, and the officers who arrived were doing their job and nothing more a routine check that had the potential to become significantly more complicated depending on how the next several minutes went. What they had not expected was Vincent Callahan meeting them at the front drive before they had cleared their vehicle. Vincent had spent enough years interacting with law enforcement in enough different contexts to have developed over time a very precise understanding of what those interactions required. Not deference, he had never been a person who confused cooperation with submission, but accuracy, clarity, the willingness to present exactly what was real without embellishment or deflection, because embellishment and deflection were what turned manageable situations into unmanageable ones. Vincent Callahan had not maintained a chapter in this county for 15 years by creating situations he couldn't manage. Officers, he said. He used their names from their badges, a small thing, but the kind of small thing that registered. Vincent Callahan. I know why you're here. Happy to walk you through what's happened tonight. The older of the two officers, a man named Reyes, who had a decade on his partner, and the particular watchful patience of someone who had been surprised enough times to stop assuming he knew what he was walking into, looked at the line of bikes and then at Vincent. Mr. Callahan, Reyes said, you want to explain the bikes first? Sure, Vincent said. Someone called me for help. I came. My people came with me. Nobody has been inside the property without an invitation. Nobody's been touched. Nothing's been damaged. You're welcome to verify that with the homeowner. Reyes studied him. Who called you? Emma Whitmore, the homeowner's daughter. And what kind of help did she need? Vincent looked at him steadily, the kind she couldn't get from the people she was already with. Reyes processed this. His partner, younger and slightly more tightly wound, his hand near his belt in the automatic, nervous way of someone who had arrived expecting a different kind of confrontation and was recalibrating. Reyes put one hand out very slightly in the direction of his partner, a small settling gesture, and kept his attention on Vincent. Her husband's inside, Reyes asked. Last time I checked, she's inside with her mother and sister. She's fine. She's safe. Another assessment. Reyes was good at this, the particular skill of reading situations that didn't conform to the categories on the report form. He was reading the line of riders behind Vincent, none of whom had moved, none of whom were performing either aggression or innocence, just sitting or standing with the patient, settled energy of people who had done what they came to do and were prepared to wait as long as necessary. He was reading Vincent's face and posture and the absence of anything that looked like theater. Mr. Callahan, Reyes said finally, I'm going to need to speak with Mrs. Whitmore directly. Of course, Vincent said, I'll take you to her. What happened in the next 40 minutes would later be described by Officer Reyes. His report, one of the more unusual domestic situations he had encountered in his career, unusual, not for the presence of danger, which had already resolved itself by the time he arrived, but for the particular quality of what he found when he found it. A woman who was calm, a family that had closed ranks around her, a husband who was present and composed in the practiced, deliberate way of a man who had decided that composure was still his best available asset. A recording on a phone that Reyes listened to in the estate's front corridor with his partner beside him and his face doing the thing experienced officers' faces do when they hear something that rearranges the shape of a situation they thought they understood. He listened to all 11 seconds. He asked to hear it again. Then he looked at Emma, who had come to the corridor with her mother because she had decided in the sitting room, in the quiet, in the clarity that had been building behind everything all evening, that she was done, allowing things to happen around her. She was going to be present. She was going to handle what needed to be handled. Mrs. Whitmore, Reyes said, I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. This recording was made during a call placed from your phone to mine. Vincent Callahan, Emma said. The call connected accidentally while my husband was speaking to me. And your husband was not aware the call had connected. No. Reyes looked at the phone. He looked at Emma. I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Whitmore. This isn't something we resolve tonight. This is going to require statements. A formal report, review by our domestic violence unit. Do you understand that? Yes, Emma said. Are you safe to remain here tonight? Is there a place you can stay that's separate from your husband's residence? She's staying here, Patricia said from behind Emma. No room for negotiation in it. Reyes nodded. He looked down the corridor in the direction that Daniel had last been seen. Where is Mr. Whitmore currently? I believe he's in the east sitting room with his father. James offered from somewhere behind the group. Reyes exchanged a look with his partner. We're going to need to speak with him as well. Of course, Emma said. Reyes looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of an officer who has processed enough these situations to know what they cost and what it takes and what the woman standing in front of him has already spent tonight. Doing the right thing, he said. It was not a line. It was the simple, direct statement of a person who meant it. Emma nodded. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the sitting room with her mother's hands around hers, and that had been private and real and hers. this was something different. This was the part that required her to be present and clear and deliberate, and she was. Richard Whitmore sat in the east sitting room and watched the two officers cross the hallway toward him with the expression of a man running calculations at a speed that was no longer fast enough. Spent the 45 minutes since Emma walked out of the reception hall doing what he had always done in crisis situations, managing the information. He had spoken to Bradley Harrington. He had spoken quietly and with great precision, and he had said things designed to create the impression that whatever had happened this evening was a contained, temporary disruption with a comprehensible explanation. He had watched Harrington's face as he said these things, and he had registered with the professional acuity he had relied on for 50 years that Harrington was not convinced. He had then spoken to his son. That conversation had lasted 8 minutes and had been conducted in very low voices in a corner of the east sitting room, and it had been the most honest conversation Richard Whitmore had had with his son in perhaps 15 years. Not because Richard had chosen honesty, he would not have chosen honesty in any context where another option existed, but because the situation had removed his other options with an efficiency he could not help professionally respect, even as he despised it. "What's on the recording?" he had asked. Daniel had told him. Richard had sat with that for a long moment. "All of it?" he asked. Enough of it," Daniel said. "How many people have heard it?" "Callahan. Possibly his men. The police are here." "I know the police are here." Richard looked at his hands. He looked at them for a long time, with an expression Emma would have recognized if she had been there to see it, the expression of a person confronting the absolute limit of their control. "Daniel, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Daniel looked at his father. "There are situations," Richard said, "that can be managed. There are situations that cannot. The difference between a man who survives a crisis and a man who doesn't is the ability to distinguish between those two categories before it is too late. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Daniel was very still. "You're telling me to cut a deal. I'm telling you to understand what you're dealing with." Richard's voice was flat. "You have a recording. You have witnesses. You have a wife who has walked out of this event publicly, front of my business partners, front of people with cameras, front of—" He stopped. He collected himself. "The question is no longer whether this is containable. The question is how much worse you are willing to let it become. Not going to prison over a—" "Stop." Richard said it the way he had said it when Daniel was a boy making an argument that required termination before it could finish forming. "Don't say things that can be repeated. Don't say things in this room that you would not want repeated. Clear?" Silence. "Is it clear?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Then sit there and do not say another word until I tell you to." Richard looked at the door. He looked at it with the eyes of a man who had walked into rooms his entire life and configured them to his advantage, and who was sitting in one now understanding that this was the room he would not be able to configure. 71 years old. He had 3 pending partnerships, a charitable foundation attached to his name, a family legacy that he had spent decades constructing with the same patient deliberateness his son had used to construct his marriage. He was looking at the door, and he was doing the calculation that he had done 1,000 times, cost versus containment, exposure versus control, and arriving at an answer he had not arrived at before. The answer was it was already done. He did not say this to Daniel. He did not say anything else to Daniel. He sat in the east sitting room and waited for the officers to arrive, and when they did, he stood and extended his hand and was the version of himself that had navigated 5 decades of difficult rooms. He was cordial. He was cooperative. He answered every question put to him in the careful, precise language of a man who had spent 50 years in proximity to lawyers and understood exactly which words created liability and which words did not. But he did not once look at his son. Daniel, sitting across from his father in the east sitting room of his wife's family's estate with 2 officers asking him questions he had not been prepared to answer, honestly, felt the specific, devastating gravity of that, the not looking, the withdrawal of the attention that had oriented him his entire adult life. Father, who had always been there, not warmly, not gently, not in any of the ways that word is supposed to mean, but there, present, available for consultation, fixed point, had turned away. He had lost his wife. He had lost the room. And now, in the 8 inches of space between him and his father's profile, he was losing the last thing he had believed was structurally guaranteed. Daniel Whitmore was 40 years old, and he was alone in a room of his own making, and for the first time in 15 years, he had no idea what to say. Vincent was standing outside near his bike when Emma found him. The officers had been inside for nearly an hour. The guests had thinned significantly. A significant number of people had quietly, collectively decided that the appropriate response to the evening's events was to retrieve their coats and their dignity and their willingness to plausibly claim they'd left before the interesting part. The ones who remained were family and close friends and a handful of people who had made the specific calculation that witnessing the rest of this evening was worth more than the social cost of being seen to stay. Emma came out through the side door with a coat over her bridesmaid's dress and a cup of coffee she'd found in the kitchen. She crossed the drive to where Vincent was standing with two of his riders in a conversation that stopped when she approached, the men stepping back with the natural, undemonstrative courtesy she had noticed in all of them. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. She held out the coffee. "Didn't know how you take it." I put it black. He took it. "That's right." She stood beside him for a moment. Not too close. Not performing distance either. Just beside him, in the natural way of two people who have now been through something together and are standing in the aftermath of it. "The officers are with Daniel," she said. He nodded. "They're going to want you to come in and make a statement about the recording, about what you heard." "I know," he said. "I'll do whatever is useful." Emma looked out at the dark. The night was cold and very clear, kind of quiet that follows large events, not empty quiet, but the full, resonant quiet of a space that has just held something enormous and is settling back into itself. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "Clinic," she said. "When you looked at me, when I said I was leaving and you said wait," she paused. "You saw it, didn't you? You saw what was happening. That's why you gave me the number." Vincent held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at it for a moment. "I've known people who were carrying things they couldn't put down," he said. "Get to recognize the weight of it, the way they move around it. Things they apologize for that aren't their fault." He looked at her. "I saw it, yeah." Emma absorbed this. "You never said anything." "Clinic, you didn't ask." "Not my place to ask," he said simply. "My place to make sure you had a way out if you needed one." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why, you didn't know?" Vincent considered the question with the patience of a man who doesn't rush answers. "You waited 2 hours in a parking lot for a dog that belonged to a stranger," he said finally. "Had. Because you couldn't leave something alone that was hurting. You didn't know me either." Emma felt something move through her chest, not the sharp, acute things she'd been feeling all evening, the adrenaline and the fear and the fragile, terrifying aliveness of a person emerging from something. Something quieter than that. Something that had a much longer history in her than tonight. "Your dog," she said. "Is he okay?" Vincent's expression changed in the way it had changed in the clinic when she first told him the dog would be fine. Something unguarded. Something real. "He's great," he said. "Ridiculous. Sleeps on my couch," which I told him he was not allowed to do, and he acts like he doesn't speak English when that rule comes up. Emma laughed, a real one. It surprised both of them slightly. Then Vincent smiled, not the restrained, watchful expression he wore most of the time, but an actual smile, the kind that changed the whole geometry of a face, and Emma thought, there it is. That's who he is under all the rest of it. A man who has a dog that sleeps on his couch and pretends not to understand the rules. "What's his name?" she asked. "Cash," Vincent said. "Cash," Emma repeated. "That's a good name." He came with it. The shelter gave it to him. He looked at the coffee cup, kept it because it suited him. He looked like a Cash. Emma smiled. She was still smiling when the side door opened and Officer Reyes appeared and said, "Mr. Callahan, we're ready for you." Vincent handed Emma back the coffee cup, straightened, and moved toward the door with the same economy of movement she had first noticed in the clinic, purposeful, unhurried, containing no wasted energy. The door, he paused and looked back. "You're going to be okay," he said, not as reassurance, not as a performance of comfort. Statement of observed fact, delivered by someone who had seen enough of the world to know the difference between people who were going to be okay and people who weren't, and had made a determination about which category she belonged in. Emma held his gaze. "I know," she said, and she meant it. For the first time in a very long time, she said something about her own future, and she meant it completely. Twist came at 11:47 p.m., and it came from a direction no one had anticipated. Bradley Harrington had, by all appearances, left. His car had been retrieved from the valet at approximately 9:30. His wife had been seen collecting her wrap from the coat check. Consensus among the remaining guests was that the Harrington departure was the clearest possible signal that the evening had cost Daniel Whitmore exactly what his father had feared. It would cost him the deal, the partnership, the 11-day countdown to a closing that was now very obviously not going to close. What no one knew, because it happened in a corridor that only two people occupied, that Bradley Harrington had not in fact left. He had sent his wife home, and he had remained standing in the corridor outside the room where Emma was sitting, their mother, waiting with the patience of a man who was used to waiting for the right moment to say the right thing. Emma came out of the room alone at 11:42 to find a glass of water, and she found Bradley Harrington instead. She had met him perhaps 6 times over the course of Daniel's business dealings. He was in his 60s, as heavy set, with the blunt, direct manner of someone who had made his money in industries that didn't reward indirection and had never developed a taste for it. She had always found him slightly uncomfortable to be around, not because he was unkind, but because his directness had always felt, in the context of evenings with Daniel, like a proximity to truth that she needed to be careful around. She stopped when she saw him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Harrington." She waited. He looked at her with an attention that was different from most of the attention she'd received tonight. Not concern, not calculating, not performing sympathy. It was the look of someone taking a measurement. "I want to ask you a question," he said, "and I want you to know that, however you answer it, what I'm about to tell you doesn't change." She waited. "How long were you trying to leave?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "A long time," she said. He nodded slowly. "I've been in business with Daniel's father for 6 years," he said. "I have suspected for approximately 4 of those 6 years that something was not right in that family. Not specifically, I couldn't have told you what I was picking up. It was nothing specific. Something." He paused. "I want you to know that the Harrington Group will not be closing the Meridian deal with Daniel Whitmore." Emma absorbed this. "I also want you to know," he continued, "that I have a legal team. If you need resources to pursue whatever you decide to pursue, legal resources, specifically my team is available to you. No cost, no condition." I don't like what I heard on that recording. Don't like that it was happening, and I was in rooms with that man, and I didn't look harder. He stopped. "That's all I wanted to say." Emma looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Daniel's voice saying, "You know what this is going to cost you." The implicit architecture of threat that had structured her understanding of leaving for years, the money, the lawyers, the influence, the apparatus of powerful men that Daniel had built around himself like additional walls. The way he had always made the cost of escape seem unsurvivable. She thought about Harrington standing in a corridor at 11:42 p.m. with his wife already in the car, waiting to tell her something that didn't benefit him in any measurable way. She thought about Vincent in a parking lot at midnight saying, "I pay my debts." She thought about her mother's hands holding hers. She thought about Claire's voice breaking in the cold, "I should have looked harder." She thought about a dog on a highway looking up at her. She thought, this is what it looks like. This is what the world looks like when you are finally in it instead of surviving alongside it. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," she said. "Bradley," he said. "Bradley," she extended her hand. He shook it. "I'll be in touch." He nodded. He picked up his coat from where it was folded over his arm. He walked to the front door and left. Emma stood in the corridor alone. She stood there for a full minute, in the quiet of the house, feeling the weight and the shape of what had just happened. Not the drama of it, not the theater of it, but the actual material reality of it. The recording, the witnesses, Harrington's lawyers, Vincent's testimony, her mother's voice saying, "Baby, what has he done?" The look on Richard Whitmore's face when he turned away from his son. The architecture was not invulnerable. It had looked invulnerable from the inside, from within the structure, looking up at walls that were designed to look like permanence. She had been standing inside it. She had not been able to see its actual dimensions. From the outside, she could see it clearly. It was not as large as it had seemed. She walked to the kitchen. She found a glass. She filled it with water from the tap, and she drank it, standing at the counter. And she thought about tomorrow not with dread, not with the particular braced quality of someone who has spent 5 years thinking about tomorrow with dread. She thought about it with something closer to curiosity, a strange, had tentative, real curiosity about the shape of a future that was, for the first time in almost 5 years, actually hers. She set the glass down. She went back to her mother and sister. She had a great deal left to do, and she was ready to do it. In the east sitting room, Daniel Whitmore sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance and said very little for a very long time. Officers had been patient and thorough. They had documented everything they needed to document. They had informed him in the precise language of people who understand what words mean legally, what the next steps would involve, and what would be required of him. Treated him with professional courtesy, which was somehow worse than any other treatment would have been, because professional courtesy removed every possible surface to push against. Father was no longer in the room. Richard had excused himself 40 minutes ago politely, cooperatively, with the same composed correctness he had shown throughout, and had not returned. Daniel could hear faintly the sound of his father's car being pulled around to the front of the estate by a valet. Father was leaving. Father was leaving, and the deal was leaving, and Emma had looked at him in the cold driveway in front of everyone and said goodbye in the voice of a person who meant every syllable. Then she had turned her back and walked away. The sound of those engines had been the loudest thing in his life. He sat in the sitting room, and the officers had gone, and the house was very quiet, and Daniel Whitmore, for the first time in 15 years, had no room to configure. He had no performance to give. He sat with the thing that was left when everything else was stripped away, and it was not dramatic. It was not the operatic unraveling of a man confronting his crimes. Just small. He felt very small. Like the actual person inside all of the architecture was something that had never been fed and never grown, and had been obscured for so long by the larger constructed version that he had, at some point, stopped being able to find it. He did not cry. He sat. He sat for a long time in the very quiet room, and somewhere in the house his wife laughed at something her sister said. He heard it through the walls, that real laugh, the one he had heard tonight from across the reception hall, and recognized immediately as not the performance laugh, and had felt, in that recognition, fury he couldn't name. Now he heard it again, and the fury was gone. There was nothing there where the fury had been, just the sound of a woman laughing in her mother's house, and the understanding that the sound had nothing to do with him and never would again. Picked up his phone. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he called his lawyer, because there was nothing else left to do, and because even the most hollow version of a man knows, eventually, when a room is over. The morning after Claire's wedding, Emma woke up in her childhood bedroom and lay completely still for 60 seconds. This was not something she had done by choice. It was something her body did automatically, the same thing it had done every morning. For 4 years and 11 months, this 60-second suspended state before full consciousness arrived, this liminal breath between sleeping and waking, where she existed in a space before she had to begin managing everything. She had always hated those 60 seconds. They were the 60 seconds before the performance started, and knowing they were ending was its own particular weight. This morning, the 60 seconds ended and she opened her eyes, and the weight was not there. She lay in the room where she had slept as a girl, and she listened to the house, and she took a full inventory of what was present and what was not. Her mother was already awake. She could hear movement in the kitchen below, the specific sound of Patricia Whitmore making coffee with the precision of someone who has performed the same ritual for 40 years and finds comfort in its exactness. Claire was still asleep down the hall. She had finally gone to bed near 2 in the morning, she and James having stayed long after the last guests left, long after the officers had filed their reports and collected their documentation and departed with the careful, true professionalism of people who had done their portion of this work and understood that the rest of it would take considerably longer than one night. Daniel was not in the house. He had left sometime after midnight. She had not watched him go. She had been in the kitchen with her mother. Some point, the sound of a car on the drive had reached them. Patricia had looked up from her coffee mug and then looked at Emma and said nothing. Emma had said nothing, and that had been enough. He was gone. The particular gravitational field that his presence had generated in every room he occupied, the thing she had spent 5 years navigating, calibrating herself against, measuring every movement and word in relation to, was gone. Absence of it was extraordinary. She had expected it to feel like relief. It did feel like relief, but it felt like other things simultaneously, things she had not anticipated and did not yet have clean names for. It felt like sign outside, Hattie feast down something very heavy, the way your body doesn't immediately understand that it can stop holding the position, the way the muscles still carry the shape of the weight. She had spent 5 years building a particular kind of internal architecture designed specifically to manage Daniel's presence. And that architecture didn't dissolve overnight just because the reason for it had walked out the door. She knew this. She had been honest with herself for long enough in the private spaces she had preserved against everything to know this. She got up anyway. She got up and she went to the window and she looked out at the estate grounds in the early morning light. And she thought, one day at a time is a cliche because it is the only true thing. Today is the first day that is entirely mine, and I am going to start it by going downstairs and having coffee with my mother. She went downstairs and had coffee with her mother. Patricia was standing at the counter when Emma appeared in the doorway. She looked up and something in her face did what faces do when they have been worrying about something for a long time, and the worry has shifted into a different, more manageable shape. She didn't say anything. She just took a second mug from the cabinet and filled it and held it out. Emma crossed the kitchen and took it, and they stood together at the counter and drank their coffee in the early morning quiet of a house that had always been full of the kind of love that didn't always know how to show self, but was never, not for a single day, absent. "Did you sleep?" Patricia asked. "Better than I have in years," Emma said. Patricia nodded. She looked at her coffee. "I've been sitting here since 5, thinking about everything I should have said and done differently." "Mom, let me say it," Patricia said. "I need to say it once, and then I'm going to try very hard not to say it again, because I know it doesn't help you. But I need you to hear it." She looked at Emma directly. "I missed it. I was your mother, and I was in the same rooms as that man for 5 years, and I missed it. And I am going to spend a significant amount of time being angry at myself for that." Emma held her coffee mug with both hands. "He was very good at it," she said. "I know he was. That doesn't make me feel better." "Should a little. It doesn't." Patricia exhaled. "What it does is make me understand that I have to look harder from now on. Everything, at everyone." She paused. "You, especially. I'm going to be looking very hard at you from now on, Emma. I need you to know that." Emma felt her throat tighten in the way it tightened when something was real, not performance real, not managed real, genuinely, uncomplicatedly real. "Okay," she said. "And I need you to tell me things," Patricia said. "Not all at once, not before you're ready. But I need you to stop protecting me from the things that are true. I am your mother. I am capable of handling the truth. I am not someone you need to manage." Emma looked at her. She thought about all the mornings she had stood in front of her mirror and constructed the smile and thought, she can't know she doesn't need to carry this. She thought about the specific, suffocating loneliness of being loved by people you are actively deceiving for their own protection, and how that loneliness compounds over years into something that has its own weight, its own gravity, its own cost that you pay in the quiet spaces where no one can see. "Okay," she said again. "And then I'm going to need a lawyer." "Bradley Harrington called this morning," Patricia said. 6:30. "He said his team is ready whenever you are." Emma stared at her. "You spoke to him?" "He had my number from a charity event 3 years ago. He said he spoke to you last night." Patricia's expression was measured and deliberate, and underneath it was a purity so clean and so ancient that Emma recognized it as the oldest form of love. "He said he wanted to make sure the offer still stood in the daylight." Emma set her coffee down. She thought about Harrington in the corridor at 11:42 p.m., saying, "However you answer it, what I'm about to tell you doesn't change." She thought about what it meant that she had encountered one night more concrete and unconditional support than she had allowed herself to access in 5 years. She thought about all the ways fear reshapes your understanding of what is available to you, how it makes the world look smaller and more hostile and more sealed than it actually is. "Tell him yes," Emma said. "Tell him I'll call today." Tricia picked up her phone. Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:15 in James's flannel shirt, and her own exhausted, luminous post-wedding face. She looked at the two of them at the counter and said, "There coffee or did you drink all of it?" "There's coffee," Patricia said. Claire poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter across from Emma, and they looked at each other for a moment in the morning light, the particular look of sisters, the morning after something enormous, when the adrenaline has finally fully metabolized, and what remains is just the two of them, and everything they have always been to each other, and the new strange rearranged shape of what comes next. "How are you?" Claire asked. "Complicated," Emma said. "Yeah." Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. "That sounds right." "I'm sorry," Emma said. "About your wedding." Claire looked at her with an expression so direct and immediate that it left no room for the apology to land. "Don't," she said. "Don't do that. You didn't do anything to my wedding." "He did. And what happened last night," she stopped. She took a breath. "James," cried Emma, "in the car on the way to the hotel. Cried because he said he couldn't imagine what you'd been carrying, and he was glad you were out. My husband, the man I married 12 hours ago, cried about my sister. That is not a ruined wedding. That is the best possible version of who I just found out I married." Emma looked at her sister. Something moved through her chest that was too large and too complicated to name, but that felt its root, this like gratitude, the overwhelming, humbling, slightly unbearable gratitude of a person who has been in the cold for a very long time and has been allowed finally back inside. "I love you," Emma said. "I know," Claire said. "I love you too. Now drink your coffee because we have a lot to figure out, and I am not useful before my second cup." The legal process began 11 days later. Emma would later say to the women she eventually worked with in the shelter program she helped establish that the legal process was the part she had always been most afraid of, more afraid of it, even than the daily reality of the marriage itself. Because the daily reality, as horrific as it was at least known. She understood its dimensions and its rhythms and its texture. She had spent 5 years mapping it. The legal process was unknown, had and unknown things. When you are a person who has spent years in survival mode, register as threat before they register as anything else. What she had not anticipated was how much support showed up for the known part. Harrington's legal team was led by a woman named Diana Reyes, no relation to Officer Reyes. Coincidence that Emma would later find darkly amusing, who was 52 years old and had spent 25 of those years in family law, with a specific focus on high-conflict divorce and domestic abuse cases involving wealthy defendants. She wore her hair in a severe bun that Emma initially found intimidating and later understood was simply functional. Diana Reyes had no interest in managing anyone's comfort, including her own. She was interested in outcomes. "Here's what we have," Diana said at their first meeting. In a conference room that smelled of good coffee and the particular clean neutrality of spaces designed for serious conversations, she laid out the documents in front of Emma with the organized, untheatrical precision of someone who lived in the facts and was comfortable there. The recording, the police report from that evening, testimony of 17 witnesses, including your families, because your sister's husband, one Vincent Callahan, whose statement, I'll tell you plainly, is going to be very useful. The hotel surveillance from 3 separate incidents I've already identified in the past 2 years alone. The financial records, which tell their own story. Emma looked at the documents. "What do the financial records show?" "Economic control," Diana said simply. "Systematic isolation of assets. Kind of pattern that takes time to build and leaves tracks everywhere if you know what you're looking for." She looked at Emma over the top of her reading glasses. He was careful. But careful and clean are not the same thing. Nobody is clean. Emma was quiet for a moment, How long will this take? Longer than you want it to. That's always the honest answer. Diana looked at her steadily. But I want you to understand something. He has money and he has connections. And he has a very expensive attorney named Philip Garrett who is going to make things complicated at every available opportunity. None of that changes what we have. What we have is real. Real in family court, front of a judge who has heard everything you can imagine, is worth more than expensive and complicated. Emma looked at her. You've handled cases like this before. Handled cases like this for 25 years, Diana said. Men who built systems around themselves. Men who were respected publicly and terrifying privately. Men who believed that the architecture they constructed was more real than the damage underneath it. She paused. In my experience, those systems look more solid from the inside than they actually are. You spent 5 years inside this one. I've been looking at cases like it from the outside for 25 years. I know exactly how far the walls actually extend. Emma felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution was still months away, and she knew it. Something more foundational than resolution. The particular settling of a person who has found the right person to trust with the right task and can feel in the quality of that trust that they have not made a mistake. Okay, she said, let's start. The first time Daniel's lawyer sent a document designed to reframe Emma as emotionally unstable, a carefully constructed filing that referenced her alleged anxiety, her supposed social withdrawal, her apparent difficulty maintaining appropriate behavior in public settings, which was their language. For the wedding, Emma read it in Diana's office and felt her body respond the way it had learned, to respond to Daniel's particular brand of control. Cold hands, the tightening chest, the specific vertiginous sensation of reality being systematically replaced with a false version and being told that the false version was the true one. She sat with it for a moment. Then she handed it back to Diana. What do we do with this? We dismantle it, Diana said, without looking up from her own copy. Piece by piece, that's what I do. It took 4 months, not the entire process that would take significantly longer. 4 months to dismantle the specific structure that Philip Garrett had attempted to build around Daniel's version of events. 4 months of statements and filings and counterfilings and 2 court appearances that Emma attended in clothes she chose herself, with her mother and Claire in the gallery behind her, and which she endured with the steadiness of a person who has already survived the worst version of the thing they're being asked to face. In the middle of those 4 months, the recordings surfaced publicly. Emma had not planned this. She had not authorized it and had not known it was coming. It emerged through a combination of the police report becoming part of the public record and a journalist who covered family court cases with the specific dogged attention of someone who believes the details of how power operates in private spaces are exactly the kind of detail the public should know. Journalist's name was Rosa Parks. Again, no relation. And Emma would come to believe that the universe had a very specific sense of humor about names, and she had been covering the Whitmore case since the filing appeared in the public record. The story Rosa Parks wrote was careful and factual and devastating. It contained nothing that was not documented, nothing that was not sourced, nothing that had not already been entered into the record somewhere. It contained the 11 seconds of audio transcribed. It contained Daniel Whitmore's professional biography. It contained the statements of people who had known him in professional contexts and were, in the light of the case, reconsidering what they thought they had known. It contained, in the 4th paragraph, the detail that a Hells Angels chapter president named Vincent Callahan had responded to Emma's call and had provided a formal statement to law enforcement. The paragraph generated more response than any other part of the story. Emma read the article in her temporary apartment. She had moved into a furnished place in Santa Barbara while the legal process ran. A small, spare, deeply impersonal space that she was gradually making personal through the accumulation of small choices. A plant throw blanket, a set of coffee mugs in a color she liked. And she read the paragraph about Vincent, and she sat with the particular complex feeling of having your story exist in the world without your complete control over its shape. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was also not entirely uncomfortable. She called Vincent. He picked up on the second ring this time. She had wondered if he would. She had been wondering, the weeks since the wedding, what the appropriate relationship was between two people who had arrived at each other through the specific circumstances they had, what she owed him, what he expected, whether the debt he had once said he was repaying had been repaid or had transformed into something else, or had simply become the foundation of something that didn't yet have a name. You read it, he said. I read it, she said. Are you okay with the article says your name? My name's been in print before, he said. Not usually in this context. Sorry. I didn't know it would. Emma. Voice, as it had been in the parking lot, as it had been on the phone, as it had been in the driveway of her family's estate, steady and direct and without performance. I'm not sorry about my name being in that article. I'm not sorry about any of it. Are you okay? She thought about it honestly, which was something she was practicing. Not the automatic reflexive okay that she had produced for 5 years, but the actual honest answer to the actual question. I'm complicated, she said. That's the best word I have right now. Complicated is good, he said. Complicated means you're actually in it. She sat with that for a moment. How's Cash? She heard something in the background, a thump and a shuffle that sound exactly like a large dog rearranging himself on a piece of furniture he was technically not allowed to be on. Cash is excellent, Vincent said, currently on the couch where he is absolutely not allowed to be. Emma laughed. Does he ever actually follow any rules? Only the ones he decides to follow, Vincent said, which in my experience is the only honest relationship anyone has with rules. She laughed again. And in the laugh and the ease of it, in the naturalness of it, in the complete absence of any internal calculation about whether it was too loud or too much or inappropriate, she felt something that had been tensed for 5 years begin, very slowly, to release. Twist nobody had anticipated came 7 months into the legal process, and it came from Richard Whitmore. Daniel's father had, in the weeks following the wedding, done exactly what Emma had predicted he would do. He had retreated, had released a statement through a PR firm that said nothing specific about his son's situation, but contained language designed to suggest appropriate distance. He had paused the Meridian deal indefinitely. He had made himself, to all outward appearances, unreachable. What no one had known was that Richard Whitmore had also spent those 7 months sitting with something, 71 years old, and he had built an empire on the principle that every situation had a correct move, and the correct move was the one that preserved the most value. He had applied this principle to his business and his investments and his family and his marriages. There had been and 3 of them, and his charitable foundation, and it had served him with extraordinary consistency for 50 years. He called Emma on a Tuesday morning in the 7th month. She almost didn't answer. The number came up as a name she had saved simply as R. Whitmore. She had his number from years of family communications and had never deleted it. The same way you don't delete a phone number, even when the relationship attached to it has become something you need to be cautious around. She looked at the screen for several seconds before she answered. Emma, he said. Richard. She kept her voice neutral. Pause. Then, I've done something. His voice was different from any version of it she had encountered before. Not the authority voice, not the strategic management voice. Something older and less constructed. I want you to know before you hear about it from someone else. Her hand tightened on the phone. What did you do? Provided a statement to your attorney, he said. Diana Reyes. I contacted her office yesterday. I provided documentation and a signed statement regarding patterns of behavior I personally witnessed in my son's conduct over the past several years that I believe are relevant to your case. The silence that followed was so complete that Emma could hear the blood moving through her own ears. She stopped. She started again. Why? Another pause. This one longer. And in it she could hear the specific quality of a person choosing, with difficulty, between several possible answers and settling on the true one. Because I watched him, Richard said. I watched what he was for 20 years, and I told myself it was a management problem. He was difficult, and that difficult people needed management. Told myself that what I was seeing was ambition and drive, and the particular sharpness that successful men have. Told myself a great many things. A beat. I was in that room at your mother's house. I heard how he spoke to you. I saw his face when you walked out. His voice changed again. Not softer. Something else. Something that had the quality of a man confronting the gap between who he believed himself to be and what he had actually done. I have money and I have lawyers, and I have spent 50 years using both of those things to make problems smaller. This is not a problem I am interested in making smaller. Emma sat in her small apartment with her plant on the windowsill and her coffee mugs in the colors she had chosen, and she breathed carefully. Richard, why now? It's been 7 months. Because I spent 7 months telling myself I had discharged my obligation by stepping back, he said plainly. And then I read the article, and I read the transcript of the recording. And I sat with the fact that I had known not specifically, not in the way that would have allowed me to name it, but I had known something, and I had chosen not to look at it directly because looking at it directly would have required me to act. Acting would have cost something. He stopped. 71 years old. The things I've spent my life preserving have turned out to be worth considerably less than I believed. Prefer the time I have left to be spent on something that costs the right things. Emma closed her eyes. She thought about Daniel in the sitting room, alone, calling his lawyer. She thought about Richard in that same room, looking at his son with the face of a man calculating losses and turning away. She thought about what it meant, what it actually practically legally meant for Richard Whitmore's documentation and signed statement to arrive in Diana Reyes's office. She thought about the architecture, how it looked from inside versus outside, how it turned out that one of the walls had decided finally to come down from the inside. Okay, she said, I don't expect anything from you, Richard said quickly. I want to be clear about that. I'm not looking for... I know, Emma said, I know you're not. She paused. Thank you, Richard. He made a sound that was not quite a response, but that was also not nothing. Then he said, I hope you're doing well, Emma. I genuinely mean that. She looked at her plant. She looked at the morning light on it, the way it caught the green. I'm getting there, she said. She meant it. Divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning in March, 14 months after Claire's wedding. Diana called Emma at 8:47 a.m. and said, It's done. 2 words. Delivered in the precise, unembellished tone of a woman who had learned that the most powerful moments don't need decoration. Protective order extended, asset division finalized, the filing on the emotional instability claim dismissed with prejudice. Done. Emma was standing in her kitchen, not the temporary apartment kitchen, but the kitchen of the small house she had leased in Santa Barbara 3 months earlier, a house with a garden that she had started learning to tend with a humility she found both humbling and unexpectedly satisfying. She was in her kitchen, and she was drinking coffee, and she was looking at the garden through the window. And Diana said it's done. And Emma stood there for a moment in the ordinary morning light and felt the words settle into her body. Done. Not the beginning, not a turning point. The actual legal documented end of the structure that had contained her for 5 years. Papers signed and stamped and filed and complete. The architecture demolished by the correct authorities, the correct sequence, with the correct documentation, till there was nothing left of it but a record. Emma, Diana's voice. You still there? I'm here, Emma said. I'm here. You should celebrate, Diana said. I mean it. Go do something good for yourself today. Emma looked at the garden. I will, she said. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment. Then she called her mother. Patricia picked up immediately, the way Patricia had been picking up since the night of the wedding first ring, every time, without exception, specific availability of a mother who has made a commitment to herself about how present she is going to be. Diana called, Emma said. Patricia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, in a voice that was composed and cracked simultaneously in the way that her mother's voice did when she was feeling something enormous and managing it precisely, It's done? Done. She heard her mother exhale, a long, slow release, the kind that carries more than air. Come for dinner tonight, Patricia said. I'll call Claire. Yes, Emma said. She called Claire next. Claire answered with, Did Diana call? Which meant Patricia had already sent a text. This was so perfectly, exactly her family that Emma laughed out loud. Done, Emma said. Claire's response was not composed. Claire's response was entirely Claire, immediate and loud and completely genuine. And in the background, Emma could hear James saying yes in the particular tone of a man who has been quietly rooting for something for 14 months and has just found out it went the right way. Come to dinner, Claire said. Mom's already cooking. I know, Emma said. I'm coming. She called Vincent last. This was deliberate. She had thought about the order. Theon sign outside had. She had thought about what the order meant and what it said about the things she was still figuring out, and she had decided that deliberateness was a quality she was going to keep cultivating in herself because it was one of the things that had been taken from her, the ability to make decisions from her own center of gravity, and she was reclaiming it in every small way available. Answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. "I know," he said. "Diana's office called me this morning. The statement contributed to the asset ruling. She had not known that. She sat down on the kitchen chair and absorbed it. You knew before I called. About an hour ago, yeah? You didn't call me, no," he said. "It was your call to make. When you were ready." Emma looked at the garden. She thought about Cash, who slept on a couch he wasn't supposed to sleep on and had the right idea about rules. She thought about a rainy highway and a wounded animal, and the quality of a man's attention in a parking lot at midnight. She thought about 15 riders showing up because someone they'd been told about needed them to show up without asking questions, requiring anything except the knowledge that it mattered. "I want to come by sometime," she said, "if that's okay. I want to see Cash." A pause. Then Vincent said, "He'd like that." "So would I." "Okay," she said. "Congratulations, Emma," he said. And the way he said it, quiet and direct and completely without ceremony, was the way he said everything, and it landed exactly the way everything he said landed. "Real. Thank you," she said, "for everything. You saved his life on a highway," Vincent said, "long before I saved anything of yours." He paused. "The way I see it, we're still even." She drove out to the Hells Angels clubhouse on a Saturday in April. She had not been nervous on the way there, which surprised her and then didn't. She had driven through enough unfamiliar territory in the past 14 months, legal offices and courtrooms and crisis counselor waiting rooms and shelter buildings and every interior geography of starting over that Saturday drive to meet a man and his dog registered as something she could simply do. Cash met her at the door before Vincent did. He was enormous and black and impossibly enthusiastic, the exact dog she had sat beside in a veterinary clinic waiting room at 11:30 at night, except healthy genuinely, luminously, ridiculous healthy, with the specific exuberance of an animal who has fully recovered from something difficult and has decided with complete conviction that the world is wonderful. Put his paws on her shoulders, and she staggered back one step and laughed and said, "Hi, Cash." "Hi, yes, I remember you too." Vincent appeared in the doorway behind him and said, "Cash, down." Cash did not come down. Emma didn't mind. She sat in the yard with Cash and with Vincent and two of his men who came and went with the easy, undemonstrative friendliness she had noticed in them the night of the wedding. She drank coffee black, which she had started drinking that way because it turned out she had only been adding milk because Daniel preferred milk in his coffee, and over time she stopped noticing she was doing it, and they talked about things that were not the legal process and not the wedding and not the past 14 months. They talked about Cash and his ongoing complicated relationship with the couch rule. Talked about the shelter program Emma had begun volunteering with 2 days a week, sitting with women in the early stages of leaving and offering them the specific utility of someone who understood from the inside what that terrain felt like. They talked about the garden she was learning to tend. Vincent, unexpectedly, said he grew tomatoes and gave her 3 specific pieces of advice about soil that she wrote down in her phone. One point, one of the riders, the one with gray at his temples, the one who had caught her eye in the driveway that night and nodded, came out with a plate of something and set it on the table between them and said to Emma with complete directness, "You doing okay?" She looked at him. She thought about how to answer. She applied the practice of honesty she had been building, the one that required her to stop reaching for the automatic response and actually consult the actual answer. "Yeah," she said, "I really am." He nodded. Same small, complete nod from the driveway. Then he went back inside. Vincent was watching her with the same attention he had always watched her, with not intrusive, not searching, just present. The particular presence of a person who pays genuine attention and doesn't require you to do anything with it. "The women at the shelter," he said. "Is that helping? For you, I mean, not just for them." Emma thought about the woman she had sat with last Tuesday, 34 years old, 2 kids, a husband whose methods were different from Daniel's, but whose fundamental logic was the same. She thought about sitting across from that woman and saying, I know, I know exactly what that feels like. I know the way you apologize for things that aren't your fault. I know the 60 seconds before you remember what's true. She thought about the expression on the woman's face when she heard those words from someone whose eyes showed she actually knew. Yes, Emma said. More than almost anything. Vincent nodded. Good, he said. That's exactly what it should do. A year after the wedding, Emma stood in front of a room of 23 women and she began talking. She did not tell her story perfectly. She did not have it polished into the version that reads well. She had made a deliberate choice about that, the same way she had made deliberate choices about the coffee and the order of the phone calls on the morning Diana called. She told it the way it had actually been, the years, the increments, the invisible architecture, and the way it looked solid from inside. The thumbnail pressed into the palm, the hidden pocket, the number she had memorized within 48 hours of receiving it. She told them about a dog on a highway and the 60 seconds in the waiting room before she decided not to leave, and what that decision had eventually returned to her. She told them about standing in a driveway in a bridesmaid's dress while 17 motorcycle engines filled the night air, about what it had felt like when a man who owed her nothing and had not been asked to prove anything said, simply and without performance, "You called. I came." She told them that the most powerful thing she had learned was not how to leave. Leaving, as it turned out, was something that had happened in a single moment after 5 years of smaller moments that prepared the ground for it. The most powerful thing she had learned was how to stop performing the version of herself that someone else required her to be. The version they need you to be, she said, is a cage. Cages feel like protection until the moment you understand that you are the one inside. The room was very quiet. She looked at the faces in front of her. She looked at the woman in the third row who was holding her coffee cup with both hands and not quite meeting her eyes, the specific posture of a person who is hearing something true and is afraid of what to do with the truth. Emma had sat in that posture in her own body for 5 years. She knew it completely. You don't have to know what comes next, Emma said. Didn't. I just knew I needed to make one phone call and I had one number in my pocket and I made the call. She paused. The call you need to make might be to a shelter. It might be to your sister. Might be to your mother. Might be to someone who told you once years ago, maybe parking lot or a waiting room or a hallway, that if you ever needed someone to call. She lets that settle. Important thing is that you make it. Because on the other side of that call is everyone who was always going to be there. You just had to let them know you were ready. She looked at the woman in the third row. The woman looked up. Their eyes met. Emma nodded, small, complete, the way it had been done for her. There is a photograph that Emma keeps on the windowsill of her Santa Barbara house, next to the plant she chose herself and the coffee mugs in the color she likes. Taken on a Saturday in April, the yard of a Hells Angels clubhouse, by a man with gray at his temples who had produced a phone without being asked and said, "You two should have a picture." Nobody had objected. The photograph, Emma is standing beside a motorcycle she is not on. She is in her own clothes. Her hands are at her sides, not clasped, not hidden, not pressing a thumbnail into a palm. She is looking at the camera with a directness that is completely without performance and completely without fear. Beside her, Vincent Callahan stands in his cut, with one hand resting on Cash's enormous black head. The expression on his face is the expression she had first seen in a veterinary waiting room, the one she had needed the entire vocabulary of everything that followed to fully understand. It is the expression of a person who made a promise and kept it, of a person who said, "I pay my debts," and meant it in every possible sense of those words, of a person who had looked at a woman carrying an invisible weight she had not yet found the courage to put down and had simply ensured that when she was ready to put it down, there was somewhere safe for it to land. Emma looks at the photograph on ordinary mornings when she is drinking her black coffee and preparing for another day of sitting with women who are still inside their architectures and learning, slowly and with the specific difficulty of all real things, to see the walls clearly. She looks at it and she thinks about a dog on a highway and a number in a hidden pocket and the 60 seconds after she woke up on the morning after the wedding when the weight was not there. She thinks about the simplest truth the whole story contains, the one that all of the complexity and all of the drama and all of the 14 months eventually reduced itself to she had asked for help, and the people she asked had come, not because she deserved it more than anyone else, not because her story was larger or more important than the stories of the women she now sat with every Tuesday and Thursday, but because asking for help is the one act of courage that contains all the other acts of courage inside it, the one door that, once you have walked through it, reveals that the hallway on the other side has been full of people the entire time. She had been afraid of asking for so long that she had forgotten it was possible to ask. She asks now. Every day, in the small ways and the large ones, she asks. She asks her mother and her sister and Diana Reyes and the women at the shelter and the man with gray at his temples and Vincent Callahan, who grows tomatoes and gives good advice about soil and has a dog who sleeps on the couch he is absolutely not allowed to sleep on. She asks and people answer. That is the whole story. That is all of it. And it is enough, and it is true. Emma Whitmore, who was once a woman who pressed her thumbnail into her palm and rehearsed her smile and survived inside an invisible room for 4 years, in 11 months is done. She is done surviving. She is living now, and she is not going back.